Hello, friends. Today I'm speaking with Lanni from Greener Postures. Greener Postures is a community of free and autonomous people who come together to share their skills and learn from each other. Lanni also hosts the Greener Postures podcast and is the co-host of the World as It Is Today podcast. So please enjoy this conversation with Lanni. Your mission is to create space for free people to find each other, for free minds to come together to learn and share skills that were once commonplace but are being forgotten by our modern world. So how did you get to this mission? Like, what was your drive to come to this point in your life?
Well, I think it's been a slow progression over time, but always kind of feeling like modern society and the way of things didn't feel like a good fit to me, and having a really healthy distrust of any authority as I was growing up made me
Right.
skeptical of a lot of things. And really, a big turning point was my oldest son is 9 now, and when he was 18 months old, he had an anaphylactic response to peanuts. So he had a very big reaction to his first exposure to peanuts, and he was already dealing with eczema and other skin issues. And that sent me to a conventional doctor to get guidance, and they couldn't answer any of my questions about the why this would be happening and how to heal it. It was just, here's the Band-Aid, the EpiPen, the Benadryl. And they couldn't answer my questions, and they didn't seem curious. And that's the part that really bothered me. They didn't even seem curious as to figure out how the body worked and why. It was all, this is what it says for us to tell you, and this is what you're told. So that led me to really digging in online for the first time ever about diet and nutrition above and beyond just like weight loss and looking nice, which is kind of what diet was to me before that. And I really found that there were not a lot of answers to my questions in conventional medicine and in conventional dietary wisdom. And that led me to realizing I needed to cook my own food because I wasn't going to find it in packages or in the deli or in the restaurant. And that really has just blossomed out to this taking personal responsibility back from corporations and from government, and doing things for myself. Personal responsibility brings freedom. So to be truly free is to take responsibility for yourself, and I feel like that's kind of where the mission came from, if a long story short.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of this. They had this quote: "With great, what's it? With great power comes great responsibility." And so for
Yeah.
you, it's with yeah, with great responsibility comes a lot of freedom as well
Yeah,
in your case.
empower over your own life and your own condition. Like, the more you understand, and not only that, like, I feel like there's so much hope that can come with trying to explore how to make yourself better, instead of feeling like you kind of are surrendering to someone else doing it for you. And that can feel like a really bad place to be, where you're waiting for someone to cure you, or you're waiting for a medicine, or you're waiting for something to happen. But to be proactive and be trying to, find better answers and better ways of doing things for yourself and your family is really empowering. Feels good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see that a lot of people, I guess, go this path, kind of because of necessity, because something happens in their life, like or a loved one gets sick, and the traditional medical system just doesn't have any answers and doesn't dig deeper to the root causes of disease, and you're kind of pushed into this alternative path of discovering yourself, how to heal and how to live the life that's that's full of meaning for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So it's
Absolutely.
interesting, yeah, that so many people go this route now, and now it's easier to share with the world what you're doing because of the internet, because of YouTube.
Yeah.
So it's easier to connect for like-minded people, and that seems what you're about as well. Like, you run these workshops, you try to build a community of free-minded people. Could you talk a bit more about that? Like, what do you have in mind there? What would you like to build?
Sure. So, I mean, prior to, I think 2021 was the first time that I ever tried Zoom or like communicated with anyone I didn't already know online. And so I was really anti-tech. I still don't have a smartphone. So this is such a weird jump for me over the last couple years.
Right.
But after doing workshops here on our homestead, we did like markets, we called agoras, which were like free and open markets. I realized that there were a lot of people online that were wanting more information, and that I think I have a unique way of um, describing how I've learned something rather than teaching somebody the right way of doing things. The internet always wants to tell you, here's 5 things you shouldn't do in your kitchen, or, here are 10 ways to use a spatula. And I literally just want to show people how I'm learning, because I feel like then they can see this path to doing more for themselves, because it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the same as somebody else's way of doing it. So the workshops are actually live Zoom workshops now, the ones I do online, where I've done fermentation and fermented condiments, fermented beverages, sourdough, bone broth, and something else in there too. Oh, home canned canning. Yeah, home canning. So all of these are just, I bring the computer into my kitchen and I show people how I do the things that I do in my home, and how I kind of got to that point, how I learned, and the way I started and how I became comfortable with it. And I think there is a lot of, maybe somewhere it's valid, but misinformation about food and food safety. So I think as a lot of people need to wrap their heads around why it's not scary to leave your sauerkraut on the counter to ferment. It's not going to cause food poisoning or botulism. People need to understand why home canning can be safe and how to do it safely, and not just follow these steps and then it's safe, but how it works and why it works, so they have a full understanding, and then they can find their way of doing things within these, kind of more loose rules rather than rigid guidelines that you have to follow, with no exception.
Right. Yeah. That was an interesting point you made about being anti-technology at first and then starting to incorporate it into your life. Like, have you found a good way of kind of using the benefits of technology and the internet without letting it kind of suck you into its own world and taking over your life? How do you deal with that balance?
Yeah, I think it's really important to me that I don't take the internet with me when I go. So like not having the smartphone is a big deal. Not ever having it on the phone, and not checking texts over a dinner out or something.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
just like managing my time by making sure that I'm not only doing something to take a picture of it and post it on Instagram. I'm running my homestead, and I'm also sharing with people what I'm doing here. So that the homestead, the homeschooling, being a mom, those things all come first. Homemade food for my family. Then deciding, hey, I can set my camera up while I'm going to make these chocolates, like I did in my last YouTube video on preserving today. I just set my camera up and I had a homeschool class, and we were going to make these chocolates out of raw cacao and coconut oil. And we did that, and I filmed it. And then learning editing has been kind of fun. And that's something that I've just worked in. So yeah, I think at this point I have a good balance, because my priority is still all of the things that I'm doing in real life and still expanding my skills. And the internet has been integral to that. Like, you don't have the grandma teaching you the old ways necessarily anymore, especially here in America. And so being able to go to YouTube and watch 10 different people do it 10 different ways, and just kind of get a real idea of how I could try to do it, then the real learning always starts with the hands-on experience in house. But it's a great resource. So I'm happy to have it.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of this knowledge, this traditional knowledge and wisdom that maybe our grandparents had or great grandparents had, it has been sort of lost because there is one or two generations in between that haven't been able to carry on that knowledge, and it's not really, doesn't seem to be in demand, at least in modern society right now. So yeah, the internet kind of acts as a kind of a storage container for all this knowledge, and you can access that whenever you have a problem, or you're looking for like-minded people. So that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
it is.
Uh,
Also, but you could be AI. I don't know. Show me your hand. How many fingers? How many
right.
fingers do you have?
Who knows, right?
It can get kind of weird really fast. So you'll have to take it into context. Your real life connections are always the most important. But if you can like generate good energy with other people online, I think that other people can benefit from it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was how I first learned about diet and healthy eating, because I had eczema for a long time, and I was always looking for answers, and I didn't find them in the medical system. But then when I went online, I found so many different opinions and such a variety of options, that just weren't accessible like without the internet. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm really grateful for for having
for sure.
access to all this information,
Yeah.
even though you have to kind of dig through to find the good stuff, but
Oh yeah, there's always really weird, I mean, stuff that's way out there, and even some of the stuff that seemed way out there at first doesn't seem so weird to me now. Um, but I think that's why freedom of speech and freedom of information is so important, because all of us can just put out there what we know or what's worked for us, and then we can decide what we, as we weed through it, which what stuff resonates with us, or what might seem important, or what things we'd like to try.
right, yeah, yeah. I've noticed you like on the website and in your writing, you stress freedom quite a lot, like free minds, free lives. What does that really mean to you, and how did that grow to become so important in your life, the freedom
Hmm.
part?
So I think autonomy is extremely important, and knowing that you own yourself and you're in charge of yourself. And yes, we have to work within in laws and rules and society's rules for us, but knowing first and foremost that it's your responsibility to take care of yourself, and to think for yourself. So that has become more and more important to me as I've watched the world kind of shut down, and people stopped thinking for themselves, and kind of watching the mainstream media, news, popular culture kind of dictating the way people are thinking and forming themselves, and that people are shutting off the part of their brain that would reason, and just taking in talking points that they can spit back out. Watching those, it seems intentional almost, that society is splitting us into two, so we'll battle each other instead of work together. And I really feel like it's important, if you can think for yourself, you can get along with anybody. All of us have something in common, and I think it's really important for us to listen to each other and care for each other. And to do that, you have to be a free thinker. You have to have compassion, you have to have empathy, and take care of yourself. I think that, like I said, the more responsibility take we, the more freedom we have, and that just means if a better quality of life, because you can feel like you have some way to improve things. If you're suffering with a condition like eczema, that might not be the most important thing, or maybe it's not the hip disease for them to promote today, so there's no funding for studies. You should be able to like search and find all the information you can, and try whatever you want to on yourself in your own home, on your own body, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And I think us each seeking our own path and our own meaning in life is really important. And so yeah, that's another long windy answer
Yeah.
for why I think that's so important.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense. The freedom to take control of your life and your decisions, and um, a lot like especially if you live in cities, in big cities, it feels like a lot of this, even the duty to make a decision for your life is taken away from you because there's so many things imposed on your life that you don't have control over. So I guess that also plays into moving to a more rural area, moving homesteading, for example. It gives you a
Sure.
lot more choices, a lot more options, and in turn
Mm-hmm.
gives you a lot more responsibility and freedom, right?
Yeah, and it can be scary for people, especially if you grew up in the city. And there are those things, there's so many conveniences, 24-hour markets under your house that you walk down the stairs for, and you can get a soda any time of the night.
Yeah.
There's television constantly, entertainment, noise. And it is scary to think like, some people have never just made their own meal. Some people have never cooked a piece of meat. It's like always come from a store. So you can't just say, well, everyone should go and homestead and live on in rural property. It's like not possible. So a lot of what I try to talk about in the podcasts that I do, especially, are how can you get started where you are? Like start learning from where you are. If you're in an apartment in the city, then learn how to grow sprouts from seeds on your counter. Learn how to cook a meal, whatever your favorite out meal is. If it's a taco, learn how to cook ground beef at home, and learn how to shred your own cheese. Maybe you're not making your tortilla the first day, but it can lead to that. And the next thing you know, you're soaking your corn and grinding your own flour. So it's just like these baby steps in the right direction. Pick one thing that you're interested in, figure out how can I take more responsibility for that thing that I enjoy. And maybe that is soda. And then the next thing you know, you're making fermented fruit sodas from berries that you gathered. There's a way for any person, no matter what your interest is, to try to get more involved in the things that you consume. And I think there's a huge benefit to that.
Hmm. And what are besides the freedom and the responsibility that it gives you and the sense of control, um, what were kind of the health benefits that you noticed when you started making your own foods and growing your own food?
Huge. So my son, with the anaphylactic allergies, when we tested him for allergies after that response, he was allergic to dairy, eggs, all tree nuts, peanuts, and dogs, cats, grass, a lot of environmental stuff as well. So we had to stop buying packaged food and stop buying restaurant food and just cook at home at first. So that was a big step. And when we did that, we found all of us had benefits from that. We all felt better. And then over time, things like that have popped up for me is I had hypertension from a really young age. And I thought that was coinciding with my weight. So I was always just, doing really low calorie diets or low fat, trying vegan, whatever to lose weight. And my weight wouldn't budge and my blood pressure would get worse. And if I would lose weight, my blood pressure wouldn't get better. And it wasn't until I started just to eat real food and stop eating seed oils and other kind of processed foods that my blood pressure returned to normal and I no longer needed medication. And that doesn't actually coincide with my weight like I thought that it would. It very much coincides, or the amount of salt I'm eating, or the amount of animal fat that I'm eating. Like they tell you, it's not cholesterol, it's not salt, it's none of those things. It's that our bodies are not yet designed to eat the synthetic food that is in the store. And it's hard because it's a lot of work to cook for yourself, and it's a lot of work to learn all the things. But there's always like these little steps to move backwards. So yeah, for my son, which I really dove into fermentation because I had read some studies out of Australia on people with food allergies that they were seeing. They were doing these desensitization studies where they were giving small amounts of peanut protein to kids to see if they would become desensitized to the allergen, and some of the children were also getting probiotics, and the ones that were getting probiotics were seeing good results and to not having an anaphylactic response to the peanut protein. So I was like, looked into probiotics. At first I looked into supplements and they were very expensive and we didn't have a lot of money. So I started to figure out, where do probiotics come from? Okay, that's natural bacteria that's in our environment. It comes from, used to be more in our diet because ways of preserving food prior were fermentation, and cheese making was not done with pasteurization and milk was not pasteurized. So I started to make sauerkraut. And then that's, I think, the biggest benefit to all of our diets is to include these like more natural ways of preserving foods. And probiotics is a really big part of that fermented food.
Right. Yeah. So that's all very much connected to healing the gut, right? Healing the gut lining and repopulating the gut with healthy bacteria.
Yeah.
So, so you've seen the allergies disappear, or at least
So
lessen substantially.
my son still has a peanut allergy, but there are several nuts that he can eat. He does eat eggs and dairy, and it had been years with no problems, and even his eczema going away. But I have to be honest, recently his eczema has started to return. And it's really interesting because the same old spots that would be the problem, the joint on the inside of the elbow and places, are the same spots that have become how it started from again. So now we're looking to, what's changed in our life in this last little bit. Well, he started to go to a learning center 4 days a week as a homeschool supplement, and they give him a snack there. And it's kind of like more processed food than we would do, gluten-free pretzels or something like that. Plus, he's climbing a lot of trees. And so he's getting scratched by these trees that he might not have had so much contact with before. And I think some of the environmental things can also be an issue. So while we did see a lot of healing from that, we're kind of looking at it again and saying, what could be causing this and how do we kind of dial it back in? But it feels really good because this time when you see this, I have tools in my tool belt, a place to start from and something to go off of.
Yeah, yeah, you have an idea of what to look for, right? Like you're not just standing there and not knowing what's happening
Yeah.
and feeling so like powerless, like feeling like being a victim of your own body because your body seems to be apparently attacking your own skin, which is not true, or at least the body's only doing it to heal. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, that's really. Have you heard of the GAPS protocol by any chance?
Yes. Yeah. And so that's basically an elimination diet with careful reintroduction, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've been on it for about 4 weeks now, and it's been very successful for me at least. It's removed a lot of the inflammation and itchiness, and it's really allowed my skin to heal pretty much. So it's very based on making meat broth. So you make a lot of meat broth from chicken or beef with the bones, and so that's kind of the main staple to drink to heal the gut lining. And then you also add the probiotics, as you mentioned, with sauerkraut or fermented milk, kefir, or making yogurt, those kind of things to kind of repopulate the gut. And yeah,
Yeah, I love it. I really feel like bone broth and meat stock, it has such good healing properties. The collagen that's in the animal from the connective tissues breaks down into a gelatin, and that's really like coating and lining your whole gut. And then it's got all these amino acids and trace minerals and everything. It's just a kind of a if I ever hear a friend is sick, the first thing I don't even ask questions. The first thing I do is start a patch of broth, and then we can talk about it. It's important. It's really important to me, and that's why I've done the nourishing broth workshop, both online and in person. And that one is my most extensive book that I've written about why do this with bone broth, how to best prepare it, and what to use it for. It doesn't just have to be a drink, even though it is great to replace your coffee or any other kind of warm drink you would have, but it's also wonderful for cooking soups, sauces, like so many different things. Curry. I mean, it's you can use broth in a lot of things once you've reintroduced more foods.
yeah, for sure. It's kind of a miracle, the bone broth and the meat broth. I'm just curious, what do you think of this whole vegan diet and it being promoted as healthy and being promoted as a healthy diet to for yourself and for the planet? Uh, I myself, I've been on the vegan diet for like it was a couple of years ago. I was vegan for like one or 2 years to try and heal myself because I believed at that time that that was the way to go because it's kind of promoted that way. What are your thoughts on veganism in general and its effects?
Well, I think that when you look at the history of people, there has not been anyone naturally vegan. Vegan is a new thing, it's a new phenomenon, it's an experiment. There has been vegetarian cultures that, eggs and dairy were where they got their animal fat from, and animal protein, but all cultures have eaten some animal foods. So it's a newer experiment. And I think when people eat a vegan diet, they're usually eating a lot of processed foods. And I have to say, being someone who's close to the land and working as, creating food, I know that it's easier to get calories from an animal that you raise than it is from vegetables. And I also know that growing soy and corn or any other kind of GMO monocrop in an area is devastating to the land and to the wildlife and the insects and the microbiome of the soil. So
Mm.
any kind of if you're eating as much soy and corn as is needed for those diets or is used in those diets, then you're not treating the land well. That regenerative agriculture is the way to do it, where things exist together: chickens, cows, pigs, goats, sheep, a vegetable garden, berries growing, fruit trees, all of it together. Um, I think that the vegan diet can be dangerous, especially to young people, because it is so promoted as a healthy way to live. And I think it really can wreak havoc on your mental health as well as physical health if you are not eating real food and you're not getting the fat soluble vitamins that you get from natural fats. So if you were eating a vegan diet and you were really set on it, I would say lots of nuts, avocado, coconut. But I would really rather say tallow, lard, chicken fat, and
Yeah.
butter, because there are fat soluble vitamins in those foods like A, D, and K that are essential to living well. And you can take it a step further and say industrial agriculture as well, when you're talking about meat eating, is not as nourishing as well farmed animals, because if the animal is not eating its traditional diet, it does not have the same nutrients as it does um, when they're eating. A cow is eating grass, it's more nutrient dense than if a cow is in a feedlot not getting sunshine and not getting any grass.
Yeah.
So there's this confusion of meat eating is all being this idea of these industrial feedlots where people are abusing animals and they're in their own waste. That's not the case. So for me, we don't have cows right now, so we buy a half of a cow once a year and stock our freezer from a local farm that has grass-fed cows. I take the fat from that and I render it and I make tallow. I make skin balms. If you haven't tried tallow for skincare, it's really wonderful for eczema. And I take the bones and make bone broth, and we have the whole animal. We have beef liver, we have the heart and the tongue, and so you're getting the whole animal, your nose to tail. It's well cared for. That you have a connection with it. That's much different than the grocery store meat. That's not even the same color. The fat's not even the same color.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that about the egg yolk, that when it's pasture raised, it's a darker kind of yellow. Is that true?
Oh, much more, almost orange. Egg yolks aren't actually yellow. And when you see eggs that say they're fed a vegetarian diet as if it's a positive thing, that's very silly because chickens are omnivores. They eat insects and they'll eat even small. I've seen my chickens run by with like a little mole in their mouth. It's like, it's scary. They're tiny dinosaurs, as they say, but they are not vegetarians. And so when they're free to roam and get shoots and seeds and green grass and bugs, they have really rich egg yolks that are an orange color, and when you get them from the store, that's kind of a paler yellow, and the flavor is different. And that's not just the way it looks and tastes. It tastes better because it's more nutrient dense, because we're programmed to look for things that are more nutrient dense. I mean, that's why berries or fruit taste good when it's in season, and it's not the same when you're growing it in a greenhouse. Out of season, the strawberry is kind of flavorless versus one you picked from your yard. Yeah, the eggs are a big deal. It's a big difference, what we get from our chickens.
Yeah. So how many chickens do you have at the moment?
Right now we have about 25 laying hens and 3 roosters, and then we have 22 in the incubator right now. So we'll be hatching chicks in about 7 days.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so 25. So how many eggs do you typically get from 25 chickens?
So
What
it
do you expect?
varies seasonally, but right now we're getting about a dozen a day. That'll go from 10 to 18. So it varies quite a bit. Some chickens will lay every day, some will lay every other day, some
Right.
every 3 days. Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes because they free range, they go and hide in the woods and you think you're not getting much. And then you'll find a big clutch in the blackberry bushes. Yeah.
Right. That's great. Um, yeah, that's it's interesting that you said if you were eating a vegan diet, you wouldn't be even able to do that on your homestead right now. Is that
No,
right? Like if you had
that's
to,
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah.
I would not be able to. I could have chickens and let chickens eat the grass and the weeds outside and then process them and eat them and get the nutrients I need. They're converting the grass into something that we can consume. That's what cows do, right? We can't eat grass. They have extra stomachs. They can break that down
Right. Yeah.
and turn it into delicious meat that nourishes our bodies. It's nature. So I don't want to offend anybody. And I know there's religious reasons to not eat meat and there's ethical reasons to not eat meat. And I absolutely agree that you should not, if at all possible, support industrial agriculture. So yeah, support a local farmer to get your meat. But I really don't think it's a sustainable option without really big agriculture. And if you look at the agenda with the Culinary Institute of America and other industries like that are trying to move us towards what they are calling cellular agriculture. Have you heard of this term yet?
No, I haven't actually.
So you know Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger, and these are
Oh,
basically
right.
like
Mm.
those things are their own thing. They're made from soy or corn or whatever, and they're like a slurry that has beet juice added for blood, and it's supposed to look like a hamburger.
Yeah.
So very, very processed food that's supposed to imitate meat. Cellular agriculture is a next weird, scary step in the wrong direction, where they're actually taking cells from meat and then cloning those, feeding them, and growing like big blobs of meat-like substance on a scaffolding, which then they're cutting off and grinding into a hamburger. They do
Mm.
that with chicken as well, and they're also able to do it with milk. And these big companies have a lot of money behind them. So I kind of feel like we're going to be slowly ushered in to this idea of that being it's like a no-kill meat. It's the way to have the meat without hurting an
Mm.
animal, and it's going to try to bring the veganism into this idea of accepting the cellular agriculture. It's very bizarre, and it's a big moneymaker because when you take the things away from nature that people can do themselves. I can raise a chicken and have an egg, and I can grow a garden. If you take that away from people and you move them into the city and you say, well, this is the most sustainable way for us to get the most amount of calories, is now this weird science experiment that sounds like a horror movie. Might not be in the next few years, but I'm watching it be more and more in the mainstream. It was even on the regular news on the radio in the car the other day. They were like, oh, they can make chicken now. They were talking about woolly mammoth meatballs, that they had taken a cell from petrified woolly mammoth and then grown it, and they made meatballs. And then they're saying it like it's this fun, cool thing. And I'm just watching it happen. Like, next thing, it's not an Impossible Burger, and it is a cell grown no kill burger.
Right.
Yeah.
God, yeah. I saw I saw a video of a 3D printed steak, I think yesterday. It looked horrible. It was made from soy and I don't know, some other stuff. And I mean it didn't even look good. Like usually these things kind of they try to make them look similar and
Mm-hmm.
they're devoid of kind of the important nutrients, but that didn't even look great. Like it looked
Can
not
you
like a
imagine? We all just have the 3D printer in our house, and we have the different ink cartridges of soy or corn, and we just stick them in there and
right.
press a button of we want our food to look like tonight. Even it's the same stuff. It's from the same ink cartridge, but
Yeah.
it's looks. Now I have chicken nuggets or I have a steak. It's very weird. It's very weird stuff.
Yeah, we'll just be consuming corn and soy, and everything will be made from that. And I don't know, we'll be a new species of humans that live on corn and soy. I hope
We'll
not, but
all be with our backs in a new shape from the technologies that we can.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very bizarre.
It is very bizarre, and I think it's one of the problems of living in a city and living so far removed from nature that you don't have this connection to animals anymore. So you think anything that involves some kind of a relationship with an animal, whether it's raising it or eating it, is kind of bad. And it's just because you're so far removed from it that if you haven't had that experience yourself, you just rather buy that soy packaged steak
Right. Well,
and
and if
eat
you
that.
start to
And
think about it and it's gross to you and you don't you've never seen it happen. And then if your only experience to what agriculture, like the meat industry might be, is some of the PETA, videos, the propaganda videos that they put out, like meat. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these.
yeah, I've seen them.
Meat to your meat, which was one of them that was I would go to concerts when I was young, and they would always have like a tent at the festival from the PETA, and they would be passing out these VHS tapes or then DVDs eventually of these, and they were just horrible, horrific videos of animals being slaughtered in industrial settings and people in those places abusing animals. And it made me go, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to eat the soy sauce flavored top ramen and Lay's potato chips now because
Right. Yeah.
I'm healthy.
Yeah.
That's it's sad, and it is a horrifying thing. There's no excuse for people treating animals like that. There's no excuse for not ever letting a cow outside of a warehouse. I mean, that's crazy. But they make it seem like regenerative agriculture is not possible. Like there's not enough land, right?
Mm,
Well, there is absolutely enough land because you can do a lot on a small piece of land if you're not doing a monoculture crop, if you're not wiping everything out. Permaculture is a term that people use a lot. Just things
yeah.
living in balance with each other. Joel Salatin is a farmer in the United States that's really well known, and he speaks a lot. He's a wonderful speaker, written a lot of books.
Mm,
The way he takes care of his land, which is the cows go first, the chickens come after, the chickens scratch, they eat the larva on the poop, they spread the manure out for you. The manure brings those nutrients back in to grow better grass, and then you graze your cow on it later. It's never just leaving cows in one spot until it's just mud like you see on those videos. It's
right.
crazy.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is that it's kind of a what do you call it, a symbiotic relationship because if the animals have better lives and eat the food that they're meant to be eating, they have healthier meat, and then if we consume that meat, like we become healthier as well. So it just makes sense to complete that circle and have these animals live like like they're intended to live in nature. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating. I saw you have a lot of projects going on. You have a YouTube channel, you have two podcasts if I saw
Yeah.
that correct.
Yeah.
You do workshops, you obviously you have to do some work in your homestead, you have a family. How do you manage to kind of prioritize different projects in your life?
Well, I try to combine things where I can. So anything I'm doing on YouTube or my podcast, what I'm talking about is all things that I'm doing in my real life. So there's that overlap. And then when I'm thinking about how I feed my family, I'm always doing things big batches of things and processing things as it makes sense. Like there'll be a big push at harvest time to make sure we get as much fruit and berries from our trees and bushes into jars or dehydrated or fermented. And then there's other times like now, there's this big push to get seeds in the ground. It's springtime here, and make sure that the garden gets growing. And there's always the kids to interrupt everything, but I just kind of go day by day and try to do as much as I can. And the Greener Postures podcast is my podcast, and that's where I talk about um, food mostly. So my podcast seems to have monthly themes, is what I'm working with now. The month of April is going to be all things cultured dairy. So I'll be talking about yogurt and kefir if you're American, or you can say kefir, um,
Yeah.
cheese making, and all of the things cultured dairy. And I'm going to start with my next episode is going to be talking about pasteurization and raw milk and the differences in nutrition and the history behind that a little bit. And then I my YouTube channel is not as active. I was trying to do weekly videos, but it is time consuming to edit those. So I am just doing them when I can. And I just try to combine that with something I'm making in the kitchen that I think people might like to see. A simple way of doing those things. So I like to keep them short and really to the point, with some kind of little tips to make things easier, making cleanup easier. Like that's what I really focus on when I'm learning how to kind of dial in the way I do things.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Yeah, you mentioned the raw milk versus pasteurized milk. I've also there's so much information online about raw milk being dangerous, about potentially giving you some kind of disease. What has your experience been, or what has your research shown in regards to raw milk?
So can I ask you, in Germany where you are, is raw milk legal? Is it something that you can easily find in the stores?
No, it's not. You can only buy it directly from the farmer, so you
Okay.
can't buy it in a supermarket.
But farmers are allowed to sell it where you are.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, but they have to
So
have a
in
label on there that says, "Warning: you have to cook it first before
Okay. Okay.
consuming."
So in America, it goes state by state, but some states it's just totally illegal to sell raw milk, period. Those states, usually farmers find a workaround by selling it as intended for pets. So you can feed your
Mm.
dog and cat milk. And then when you get that milk home, you can do whatever you want with it. Um, there is not a greater instance of foodborne illness from dairy. There seems to be, when Americans moved into bigger cities, they moved their animals with them. So in old timey New York, they just moved their cows into warehouses and were still milking them. And they stopped feeding them grass because it wasn't available. And they started feeding them the byproduct from the beer making industry that was kind of like in the warehouse next door. So all these grains. And when that happened, there changed the microbiome in the animals, and their waste in such high concentration gave them more certain types of bacteria that we don't want, which would be like E. coli. So there was a time in our history when that happened and people started to get sick from drinking milk. Those people were not following good practices, obviously. Cows were sick and still being milked. They were adding chalk to the milk so that it would look more white because it wasn't a good color. It would be pink because there was blood or pus from sick cows being milked. So the history of that industry, which you could look up, swill milk is what they had called it at the time. There was a book written about it, and it made them, instead of saying how can we take better care of these animals and why has this change happened, people have drank raw milk as for longer than recorded history. So
Right.
instead of doing that, they said, well, if we pasteurize it to a point, we know that we kill all of the bacteria in it, and then it's beneficial to the industry because then it is more not shelf stable, but longer lasting than refrigerator. So it has a longer shelf life. So they were aware that that happened in America. We add nutrients back to the milk. When you pasteurize the milk at a high heat, you remove some of the nutrients. So they add vitamin A and vitamin D back to milk. It's a law before it's sold, and it has to be labeled
Mm.
vitamin A and D milk. Um, when you get raw milk from grass-fed cows that are not crowded and they're well taken care of and they have good milking practices, there's not any more danger to that than anything else. And the interesting part is pasteurized milk is if you leave it on the counter for overnight, you've maybe done that on accident. It's a horrible smell. It's very stinky. You do the same thing with raw milk. The natural bacteria present in the raw milk starts to turn it into something called clabber. And clabber can be used like buttermilk. While it is sour, it starts to thicken. It's not something you want to just drink out of the glass. It can be used for cooking and cheese making. And if you're making cheeses, that can also be used as your starter culture for cheese. So when I'm learning cheese making, I'm taking raw milk and I'm leaving it on the counter similar to kefir. And then I just wait until it turns to clabber. I feed it a few times as you would a sourdough starter. And then you use that to inoculate your milk and begin cheese making. So it's like nature is like born in with all of these the nutrition and balance that we need to take it in, right? And then also it's made with all of this bacterial diversity that can kind of take care of itself and help preserve it for longer consumption. So you're not going to get sick if you get milk from a good source. So I say know where it comes from, and then also keep in mind in the United States at least there's pasteurized milk, ultra pasteurized milk, and there's also something called vat pasteurized. Are you familiar with any of those terms?
I don't know vat pasteurized. I haven't heard that.
Okay. So pasteurized milk, it's heated to a certain temperature for a certain period of time. Ultra pasteurized is heated to an even higher temperature. I would not recommend that at all. So many nutrients are removed from that. But vat pasteurized is heated to a low temperature of I think 140 degrees for 30 minutes. Whereas pasteurized is like 240 for 2 minutes. Something like, don't quote me on that, but it's close to that. So vat pasteurized is a slower and longer heat so that it retains more of the nutrients. So if you can't get raw milk, vat pasteurized milk might be a good option. And it's got a good taste, and you can often find it where it's not homogenized and doesn't have the vitamin A and D added to it, which I try to avoid consuming synthetic vitamins. So that's one of the things that I look for in my milk.
Yeah. So sad that it's so difficult to actually source high quality milk. I mean, here I have to drive to a local farmer, but it's not that far, but it's a 30-minute drive outside of the city, get the milk and come back. I guess more people would be willing to do that if they weren't as desperate as me to heal. If it was more locally available and more easily consumable, then
absolutely. Something a really good resource on nutrition and milk and past history of pasteurization is the Weston A. Price Foundation. Are you familiar with them?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. And so Weston A. Price was a dentist in the 1930s, and he went to several countries and did studies on the physical degeneration in nutrition. That was the name of his book. So he went and looked to see tribes that were still eating their traditional diets, and then tribes that had switched to eating a more Western diet with processed grains and seed oils and sugar, and the difference between their dental health as well as their other physical health. And so he also found that if a mother had eaten the Western diet and given birth, that their kids had different facial structures and a more narrow dental arch and more narrow sinus passages. They didn't have room for their wisdom teeth anymore, and they had sinus issues and dental cavities. The information we got from that study that I think is most valuable is that there is not one perfect human diet. It depends on your region. All these people ate differently, but what they had in common was they ate food seasonally, and it was from their region, and everyone ate some animal food. Some of the animal food was raw, whether that be milk or eggs or raw liver, and they ate nose to tail animals, and they didn't eat processed white sugar or grain and seed oils. So it's there's a pretty big room within that for you to find your favorite diet, what works for you. It's just looking at the natural way things come about and how to best prepare them, I think is really valuable.
Right. Yeah. And it makes sense because, I mean, pasteurizing the milk kind of has less incentive for the farmers to actually take care of the cow's well-being because
Hmm.
if everything is killed afterwards, then yeah, and if you have to, or if you sell raw milk, then you really have to take care of the cow
Yeah,
and make sure the cow is healthy, eating healthy, so that the
absolutely.
milk will be healthy as well.
Yes.
So yeah, are you thinking about getting cows as well, or is that not an
Yeah,
option for
this
you?
where we are currently used to be a dairy farm, so there's a very old dairy
Oh,
barn on here. So if we can get the barn in shape, we've already put the fencing in, and we have had cows steer for beef before at our last property, so I have some experience. I would love to have a milk cow, but it's a big commitment.
right.
But here's a great example of learn where you are. So I want to have a milk cow someday. I'm learning how to make kefir and all about raw milk, and I'm learning how to make cheese now, so that when I have that milk in abundance, especially in the summertime, I could be making giant wheels of cheese and stashing them away for to get us through the winter when the cow takes her break.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. My dad actually he grew up on a farm in Missouri, and they had a lot of milk cows as well. And
Oh yeah.
so I'm kind of going back to that, not to live on a farm, but in that direction too, because he really wanted to get away from that life, and
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, this is really great. Like he lived so close to nature and close to animals and had good food, and yeah, it's very interesting how these things develop. If someone were to kind of move to the countryside, start their own homestead, what would your first recommendations be on how to get started? Like, what's the first thing you would recommend somebody think of?
Well, I'd say start where you are now and start learning how to cook. That's what I would say. Learn how to cook food from scratch. And that means something different to everybody. Does that mean a can of cream of mushroom soup and a bag of egg noodles and making a casserole? Or does that
Yeah.
mean, making noodles from scratch? And how do you make cream of mushroom soup? That's with dairy and mushrooms and onions. So learn how to cook more than you can now and continue to step it back until you're working with real ingredients. For instance, I learned how to make sourdough and I made it for almost a year before I got myself a grain mill and now I'm grinding my own flour. So it's just like, but I've never grown my own wheat. So there's always another step back from it, but just learn as much as the process of where food comes from and how you put it in your body and become more connected to that. Start there. And then as far as like hands-on homesteading stuff, I think chickens are a great place to start. Gardening takes a long time and you learn it over years because you have to wait through seasons and a full year is a whole cycle. But chickens, 21 days to hatch from an egg, 4 to 6 months until they're laying eggs, and you can really see this whole cycle happening. And you can use them for meat obviously, but you could just use them for eggs. They're fantastic to watch. They're good pest control around the farm, and they are good to clear garden beds. They help keep weeds in control. Like it's excellent. Farm fresh eggs, homegrown eggs are the best things you can get to.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, so this whole like making your own food from scratch usually probably requires a lifestyle change to some degree from a busy city urban life. What would you say to someone who says, "Hey, I have a full-time job, I have a family I have kids to take care of. I don't really have extra time to spare to make food from scratch." What would you say to them?
Well, I would say, where do you budget and prioritize your time spent? Because how many hours a day is spent scrolling, or how many hours a day is spent on Netflix? Where can you just scale that back a little bit and learn something new? And maybe first all you're doing is scrolling through cooking videos, and then slowly just a little time less spent there. But when I really started cooking from scratch, I had a son and my husband was working full time, and I was a production manager in an auto body shop. So I was working out of the house for at least 8 hours a day, sometimes 10, 5 days a week. So it's just about where you prioritize your time. And I didn't have a big kitchen. We lived in like a little mobile home on a piece of property. It was like 1970s mobile home, the tiny little postage stamp stove and a really old microwave that was built into the wall that I didn't use. So I was scared I was going to catch fire. And not a great oven. And I just little by little, fermentation doesn't take any cooking. You slice some cabbage and rub some salt into it and leave it on the counter. That's the short version, and I could explain it in much more detail as I do in many podcasts and on my workshops. But fermentation is a great way to start, especially if you're interested in science and the way things, break down. It's really fascinating to watch. It doesn't take very much space. You could do it in a mason jar on your counter. Um, there is always time to you can always find time for something that really matters. And if you're not sick, maybe it doesn't matter to you, or you don't have family that's sick. But when you have that motivation of trying to heal yourself, it all of a sudden a lot of time opens up for you. Time to drive to a farm 30 minutes away to buy a gallon of milk. Yeah. It just finds a way.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, great. I saw also that you have I don't know if that's a new thing, but you have a membership for people. So what's the benefit of
sure.
This membership?
Greener Postures membership is there's tiers, so you can give as much as you can for a monthly. Then there's certain things like a recipe card or an exclusive video that I'm sending out just to members. And then we also have an exclusive Telegram group chat that you can be a part of if you're a member or if you attend any of the workshops, and you get lifetime access to that, even if you then stop being a member later, or if you only take one workshop and then you're in this group. And I think the benefit to the group is really that we have a good group of people that have the same goals in mind and are all learning together. So questions come up, we can troubleshoot together. They're posting pictures, which are inspiring to see things people are getting started doing. Somebody was talking about experimenting with sauerkraut this morning, and they had some ginger on hand and they added it to it. And they're like excited to see what it tastes like with ginger, and I'm posting pictures of the bread I'm working on or the upcoming workshops, or we're discussing after the workshops, how things turned out, or follow-up questions people had. So I think the group is really great. The membership is for people who are really into it and they want those extra videos from me. But as far as free content, I have the YouTube channel, I have the Greener Postures podcast as well. So it kind of depends. And I think like if you want to get to know me and I hate saying the word teaching because I feel like it's a force. I've always felt like teaching is like a forced thing, but I'm like, if you want to learn with me and understand my learning style, my style of explaining things, taking one workshop is great. And I'm only charging $40 US for my workshops. And that's pretty much any other fermentation workshop I've seen online is over $100. And I just think I want it to be accessible for as many people as possible to just have this conversation about why you don't need to be afraid of your food. Talk about where botulism comes from and why it's really rare and how to avoid making your family sick so that you can start to feel more comfortable cooking for yourself, fermenting things, maybe doing things the old way before refrigeration. And why is that okay? Why was that safe for people to do for so long? And now people are afraid of it. Having those conversations in my workshops are great. And they're about 2 hours long, and they're on through Zoom, and I speak to you live. But if you can't make it, or if there's not one scheduled coming up, you can sign up for these workshops for the replay. So you get the video of a previous workshop as well as my book and the access to the group chat.
Okay. And what's the best way for people to find you? Is that greenerpostures.com?
Yeah, everything's on greenerpostures.com. Greenerpostures.com/membership will tell you all about the membership. Greenerpostures.com/workshops has all of the workshops that are available, and you can purchase the replays there. You can sign up for a mailing list. And then I'm also very active on Instagram. So I'm posting videos and reels there all the time. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's @greenerpostures. And you can follow me on YouTube, youtube.com/@greenerpostures. My channel on there is called Preserving Today.
All right. Great. Thanks so much for doing this, Lanni.
Absolutely. It was really nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Lanni from Greener Postures. Please check out greenerpostures.com, and perhaps you might even want to take one of their amazing workshops. If you like these kinds of conversations, please consider subscribing or leaving a review wherever you can. Or if you have any constructive feedback you'd like to give me so that I can improve this show, I'd be happy to hear from you as well. And I will try to have many more of these conversations in the future with interesting guests around the topics of health and autonomous living. And until then, bye.